thrilled that I get to share these highlights, and I was honored to lead the project from September 2020 on. So, my agenda tonight is straightforward. I like to share the why, the how, and the what. Why study the lived experiences of Black girls in Delaware? How did we collect our data? And what did we find out? So, starting with why elevate the experiences of Black girls in Delaware? So, we know that a lot of the discourse has focused on Black boys and Black men. But what gets lost in those conversations often are the unique experiences of Black girls. We need research, particularly about Black girls, so we can drive targeted policies and programs that help them thrive. I also want to point out some major findings from previous research studies that help fuel the impetus behind a project such as this one. Black girls are devalued on the basis of race and on the basis of sex, and oftentimes this happens simultaneously, creating unique experiences of oppression. Black girls are often adultified, and this means they're not viewed as children, as innocent, as those who deserve leniency when they transgress, the same ways that other children of other racial groups might be viewed. And this sometimes results in serious, even violent consequences. And Black girls experience weathering. This refers to the erosion of physical and mental health over time after exposures to systemic racism, discrimination, adversity in all forms, and having detrimental impacts on one's health. The picture to the right there is of Naya Kenny. Back in 2015, she was a high school student at her school in South Carolina, and she witnessed a Black female peer being thrown from her desk by a white police officer. Uh, Naya encouraged class members to record the event using their cell phones. Naya ended up being arrested along with Shakara, the girl that was thrown. So I use that story. It's one among many where we have these negative experiences of Black girls that show criminalization and adultification, and overall a dehumanization of Black girls. I hear echoes of Sojourner Truth's "Ain't I a Woman" in these kinds of stories. It more resembles "Ain't I a Girl?" So we need more research that humanizes Black girls. So how did we conduct this research? So there was a survey administered online via Qualtrics in summer 2020 and then in spring 2021. The survey was anonymous and it was actually made up of four different measures: the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, which asked many questions around health; the PYD, the Positive Youth Development Questionnaire, which asked a lot of questions about character; the Kid Screen 52, which asks a lot of questions about health and relationships; and the PRACY, the Perceptions of Racism in Children and Youth, which asks a lot about experiences with racism. So together, those measures made up our survey. The survey took about 15 to 20 minutes to take, and participants received a $5 gift card for participating. We also conducted focus groups and individual interviews over Zoom from the summer of 2020 to late fall of 2020. Those focus groups, they lasted about an hour, hour and 15 minutes, and participants received a $10 gift card for participating. Originally, the plan was to conduct all of this in person, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, we pivoted to using virtual means. So that means a lot of our recruitment happened via virtual channels, but we were able to recruit from schools, from different community centers, and just through our networks. Our target population for both data collection strategies were Black girls ages 10 to 19 who live in the state of Delaware. Topics included for both data collection strategies were physical health, nutrition, relationships, experience with racism, how girls describe themselves, and a host of other topics. And then in our interviews, we were able to also ask, what supports do you need to thrive better in Delaware? I will point out that a number of our survey participants also participated in our focus groups. Not all of them, but some of them. So we did have focus group participants who had also participated in our survey. So this work will result in 6 main products, 5 research briefs based on our interviews, organized around the topics listed there: health, image, racism, safety, and resilience, relationships, and support. And there will be 1 brief based on the statewide survey. And tonight, as I present, I will be I will have a parallel to those topics and present in that order. The briefs will be made available on the NCBWDE website. Right. So without further ado, what did we find out? So starting with the survey findings, we see here that with among our age groupings, we have most of our participants came from the ages of 10 to 13 years old. And in terms of county, we see that most of our sample came from Newcastle County. A total of 185 participants took our survey. I have a note about our age groupings. So in literature, the ages 10 to 13 is often denoted as pre-adolescence, and 14 to 19 is adolescence. And as such, the YRBS tool and the Précis tool were designed so that those age groups were split, so that there were questions pertaining to 10 to 13-year-olds and questions pertaining to 14 to 19-year-olds. And you'll see some of my results tonight are divided in terms of that. But we broke down the adolescent age even further, keeping our focus groups in mind, thinking that people within the ages of 14 to 16 have more in common with each other in terms of experiences, and those within the 17 to 19 age group would have more in common. Thinking early high school to mid high school, maybe similar experiences versus those later in high school and may have graduated. Okay, so that explains the groupings, and you'll see some of our results broken down in that way. I'm sharing highlights tonight in hopes that this sort of gets you a sense of the reports that will be coming out. And there were many, many data points that we could discuss, but I wanted to highlight ones that sort of could start the conversation around policy-driven decisions. So, starting with health, the amount of sleep and the amount of time that folks were on electronic devices was a concern. So, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that children ages 6 to 12 receive at least 9 hours of sleep per night. We see that a little over a quarter of our 10 to 13-year-old girls reported getting 9 hours or more per night. But this meant that 74% were sleeping fewer than 9 hours per night. Similarly, turning to the 14 to 19-year-old age group, we noted that 18% of 14 to 19-year-olds were sleeping 8 or more hours a night, meaning 82% were sleeping fewer than 8 hours per night. And the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that those 13 and older get at least 8 hours. So, in thinking about what's associated with lack of sleep or diminished sleep, it could be diminished memory, or it could be trouble regulating mood. And then, even over time, it could have a correlation with obesity. It's really important to think about A, the amount of hours our girls are getting, but then B, what could be keeping them up from getting that amount of sleep. We see that half of our respondents said that they spent 3 hours or more per day using electronic devices. So this included social media, okay, for something that was not schoolwork. So we're keeping in mind this is during the pandemic, and we can understand why folks might be on their screens more during shutdown. However, that also might bring to light why we should talk about this even more, because being on electronic devices is also associated with negative health outcomes. Being on them for too long of hours. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that folks don't spend more than 2 hours on their screens. So seeing that half of our respondents are spending 3 or more hours on that could be a concern. Turning to body image, there is some indication around a a strong interest in changing one's body. And we noted this particularly among the 14 to 19-year olds. So, two-thirds of our respondents said that at least sometimes they worried about their appearance. And then half of our 14 to 19-year olds versus a third of our 10 to 13-year olds said they were trying to lose weight. You see in the table on the right, you see the response categories and the percentages under each response category. So we see under the lose weight what I had just stated, but also according for those who want to stay the same weight, it was about the same, but as far as proportion wise between the two groups, 20%. For those who wanted to gain weight, it was a little higher among the 14 to 19-year olds. For those who weren't trying to do anything about their weight, we see that 30% of 10 to 13-year-olds answered that one, but versus 12% of 14 to 19-year-olds who were trying not to do anything about their weight. So we need to think about what could be behind those kinds of decisions. Is it health? It could very well be being conscious about your health and wanting to lose weight, wanting to change your body. But we also know that beauty ideals circulate and permeate society and media and discourse. So thinking about what could be behind this is a cause is a point of interest. So turning to character, our girls in our study appear to value social justice, generosity, and empathy. So we see that most of our respondents thought that these following statements were extremely important: giving time and money to make life better for other people, helping to make sure people are treated fairly, and speaking up for equality. We see that the percentages are really high for folks who thought those were extremely important. And then turning to the way girls would describe themselves, and there's these statements saying, "Would these describe you? How well do these describe you?" We see over 80% felt like the following described them well: feeling sorry for individuals when being picked on, seeing another person who is hurt or upset and feeling sorry for them, and being bothered when bad things happen to good people. So, along those lines of humanizing, we see that our girls really value justice and fairness and feeling sorry for folks who might be downtrodden or who might be beaten down for some reason. So turning to connections to neighborhoods, it was a little concerning to see that half of our respondents disagreed that adults in their city or town listened to what they had to say and cared about them. We need to think about the ways in which our neighborhoods and communities are lifting up our Black girls, are making them feel welcomed, are making them feel valued, are making them feel listened to. Because while we could say close to 50% agree, we see that half of them don't agree with that sentiment. So thinking about our communities and our neighborhoods, how these villages are raising our Black girls and showing them that they have their backs. Connections to schools. So most respondents said they did well in school. However, we also see results that show that there's some not they weren't as happy in school, and they didn't necessarily believe their teachers encouraged them. So we see two-thirds indicated that they did very well or extremely well in school. And I have the distribution of the other answers there. But it might be a beating the odds kind of situation going on here, because only 35% said they were very or extremely happy with their schooling. And then, though the percentage is relatively small, it's still concerning. It's still substantial to see that 17% of our girls did not believe that teachers encouraged them, and 16% felt that their teachers did not care about them. So that could be really concerning to think about. Do our girls believe that the teachers they interact with on a daily basis care about them, see the best in them? But we do see that they see themselves doing well in school despite that. Turning to relationships with family and peers. So we saw that respondents showed they feel loved and cared for and supported by their parents. However, when it came to relationships with their friends, the results were a little more mixed. So over half respondents indeed said they felt their friends were always good friends, but this also meant that 40%, 42% felt they were not always good friends. And then a little over half indicated they could not always trust their friends. So again, this is kind of community in a different way. What's going on in Black girls' friendships where there might be some trust that's a little diminished? Turning to experiences with racism. So in the précis, the girls were asked about situations that happened to them according to their race. These were yes no questions. The situations included hearing insulting remarks based on your race, being assumed to not be smart, being treated unfairly by teachers. So here I have the percentages of those who said, yes, this happened to me. We see the top answer, the ones with the highest percentage, was hearing insulting remarks. 62% of our girls said that. Now, I will note that our results seem to be shaped by age group, in that more 14 to 19-year-olds said they experienced these situations versus 10 to 13-year-olds. Specifically, in terms of insulting remarks, among the 14 to 19-year-olds, 84% said that this happened to them versus 34% of 10 to 13-year-olds. Being closely watched in stores, 49% of 14 to 19-year-olds said this happened to them versus 18%. So it causes you to think about, is it around awareness? Because that came up in some of our interviews, asking some of our younger girls, have you experienced racism? Oftentimes, younger girls said no. It could be around awareness, it could be around protection. Going back to some of the adultification literature, is it that maybe older girls aren't being as shielded from these situations as younger girls are? The asterisks denote that these were questions asked only of 14 to 19-year-olds, is the way the précis was designed. But we see 60% of our 14 to 19-year-olds experience the assumptions of not being smart. In the précis, there's also questions around how you responded to these situations and what were your feelings. So common feelings were frustration, hurt, and sadness. And common reactions were speaking up, trying to forget about the treatment, and ignoring the treatment. And that lands heavy for me, thinking about the weathering and thinking about those subtle ways that situations and experiences could be tearing at our health, mental health, and physical health over time. I'm going to turn now to our interview findings and what we found out there. So similar to our survey findings, I wanted to share with you our distribution, our sample. So 70 girls participated in our interviews, and you see similar to the survey sample, 20 for most girls came from the 10 to 13 age group, and most girls came from the Newcastle County. And I will say, we wanted to set up focus groups so that there was this great cross conversation among girls, and oftentimes for scheduling reasons, we would have one-to-one conversations, and those turned out to be very fruitful too. But in total, whether they were focus groups or individual interviews, we talked to 70 girls. So, starting with health, from our findings, we found that there were certain factors that influenced physical activity and nutrition. So, first off, the people in your household. The people in your household, they bring food home, or they encourage you to exercise, or they do activities that involve physical movement. That influenced either your physical activity or what you ate. The girl's own interests in eating healthy or participating in exercise played a role. Having adequate time to exercise and adequate time to prepare healthy meals was a facilitator of nutrition and physical activity. And having the convenience of and access to healthy, affordable food and safe, available spaces to be physically active. The quotations here speak to these facilitators, and I'll give you time to read those because I just want you to be able to take the quotations in. So another finding around health that we talk about in our health brief is the role of social media. And a number of girls talked about the ways in which social media interfered with their sleeping. So we have a quotation there that speaks to that finding. So turning to image. The ways that Black girls describe themselves were positive. Funny, nice, goofy, outgoing. When we said, how would you describe yourself? These are the words that we heard. We also heard some more nuanced descriptions: unpredictable, problem solver, resilient. But again, these were neutral, not necessarily negative. So, again, pushing against some of the myths that might be circulating or negative depictions are really important, having girls speak for themselves on who they are. But also in our image brief, the conversation turned towards the racism girls experience. So that bleeds right into our racism brief. So girls talked about racism that they experienced in their community, in their extracurricular activities. Like one girl was saying she was looked at as sassy on social media, and then also vicariously through family members. One girl talked about how her family faced colorism, which is privileging light skin over dark skin, and how she felt the brunt of that, knowing that her family members with darker skin were being treated badly. But most of our examples around racism that we heard from our girls was in terms of school. So, Black girls reported hearing and experiencing stereotypes and negative assumptions about their academic abilities and behavior. And we have two quotations that speak to that finding. So, turning to safety, we ask girls, what makes you feel safe in your neighborhood? What makes you feel safe in your home? What makes you feel safe at school? So, emerging from their responses were four major themes. So, first, sources of safety came from knowing the people around you and knowing that they cared about you. So, in the home, knowing your parents, knowing your siblings, knowing your grandparent, and knowing that they were looking out for you. In school, similarly, knowing your teachers. Strangers in the neighborhood would make folks feel unsafe. Sources of safety was feeling welcome and valued as a Black girl. This came up in school a lot in terms of lessons and discussions where Black girls felt included and seen. It also came up in the home. Emotional safety came up in terms of in the home. And so feeling valued and feeling like someone was listening to you at home, similar to the earlier bullet around caring, helps someone feel safe. The absence of violent incidents. So knowing nothing bad happened in your neighborhood or at your school or in your home helps someone feel safe. And then also security guards, equipment, dogs, these kind of apparatuses that are associated with security and safety would make Black girls feel safe. We have a quotation there that speaks to a Black girl feeling safe in her neighborhood because of the people in her community. Safety also came up in terms of school. And so this quotation speaks to the need to have safety, not just physically, but emotionally in school and what that could look like. Returning to resilience, we ask girls about resilience and also the supports and relationships in their life because your resilience, your ability to bounce back, is sometimes dependent on the supports that are around you. So, not surprisingly, Black girls felt their strongest relationships with friends and parents. But additional sources of support were grandmothers, siblings, cousins, godparents, and counselors. I did want to point out, though, that a few reported that they mainly relied on themselves. We asked girls about their strategies and examples of resilience, and as far as getting through tough situations. So, some strategies were crying, thinking self affirming thoughts, breathing. And the quotation to the right there speaks to the self affirming thoughts, someone sort of affirming in themselves who they are and how that could get them through a tough time. In the resilience brief, in the final brief, we also ask girls what supports do they need to help them thrive in Delaware. So, Black girls talked about wanting additional health and recreational programs. The first quote talks about a need for mental health specialists. The second quote just speaks to a space to just be and hang out. I'll end my presentation with the words of one of our participants that really speak to the need to take up this charge of helping Black girls thrive in this state. Thank you so much for listening.